What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to break down a technique that I use to play triple strokes on a single bass drum pedal. A couple years ago I put up a video breaking down a technique that I use to play double strokes on a kick pedal, and it involves a sort of sliding motion where you sort of step back real quick on the pedal and then step forward again, and you basically get two strokes from one motion. The technique I use to play triple strokes is basically an extension of that double stroke slide technique. So a quick recap on how this slide technique works. It capitalizes on the spring tension in the pedal. Your foot should begin and end in the same position on the footboard. Generally, my toes will start somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way up the pedal. Take a quick little step back, flick your foot forward using your ankle. Voila, two strokes, one motion, and it really just feels like an upstroke and a downstroke like we would do with our hands, where the second stroke is a little bit louder than the first one. And like I mentioned, this technique works because it takes advantage of the spring in the pedal. And to best take advantage of the spring tension, we should take a few minutes to make sure that our pedal is set up in a way that facilitates these kinds of movements. And too many drummers work against their gear, and that's how you develop bad habits, and you could potentially hurt yourself, get like tendonitis or something in your knee. We want to work with our gear, not against it. So I'm going to pull up my pedal here. So I'm rocking a Tama Speed Cobra with an old Vic kick beater on here, and it's wicked flat on the side that I've been playing on. But the three settings you want to pay careful attention to are the spring tension, how far back the beater is at its resting position, and the height of the beater. All of these parameters will have a big impact on how your pedal responds. Ultimately, all these settings are pretty subjective. You're going to have to mess around a little bit on your own to figure out what feels best for you. But I'll at least break down what I got going on here because it works pretty well for me. So I'd say the spring tension on this right now is like medium high or extra medium. It's enough that when my foot moves around on the pedal, the footboard always stays in contact with my foot. If I didn't have enough spring tension, the pedal wouldn't keep up with how fast I'm moving. So it's certainly not maxed out, not even close. I find that if the tension is too high, the pedal feels a little twitchy and I just have a harder time controlling it. Next, we got the beater angle at its resting position. So I didn't bring my protractor with me today, but I would estimate that this is somewhere around a 45-degree angle compared to where it would be if it were resting on the head of the kick. It might be a little further back than that. But also, when the beater is in contact with the kick, it should be at about a 12 o'clock position, maybe just a little bit past. If you got to go all the way to here to hit the kick, you got to tilt your kick back a little bit, because then you're working too hard, you're working against your gear. Don't do that. If your beater's resting position is around here, you're not really going to have enough room to take advantage of the spring. You're going to feel like you just can't generate the kind of power you would want. And if it's resting too far back, you might find it's kind of squirrely and tough to control, and then the beater might come back and beat the heck out of the top of your foot. Again, you're going to have to try out a few different angles and see what works best for you. And then lastly, we have the height of the beater. So right now, this one's kind of somewhat on the lower side, I would say. The higher you set the beater, the less responsive the pedal will be, but you get more power. When you lower the beater a little bit, it makes the pedal much more responsive, but at the expense of power. And this seems to be a happy middle ground for me. With this particular beater, I got maybe 1.5 inches of the bottom of it sticking out, but when I trigger the pedal, it's just nice and smooth, aside from the fact that I can't hold it that steadily. Some other things to consider, I used to sit super, super low. I used to put my throne pretty much as low as it would go, and I would sit further back from the drums. I thought that felt comfortable, but what happened was I ended up stomping on the pedals a lot, and after a longer practice session, maybe 3 or 4 hours, my knee would start to get sore, and my hip would get a little bit sore too. And at first I was like, oh yeah, I'm sore because I'm working hard and I'm building muscles and getting strong. I think I was slowly giving myself tendinitis or some kind of repetitive strain injury. So when I finally raised my throne a bit, all of the weight that I was previously keeping on my feet, I then transferred it to my seat. But in actuality, raising the height of my throne allowed me to put more weight on the throne and actually have better balance, and that allowed me to play with a much lighter touch on the pedals. Now, having a lighter touch does not necessarily correspond with losing power. I think the opposite actually happened, because more of the energy that I was putting into the stroke was turning into sound, and instead of burying the beater started to bounce off more. It really felt more like I was flicking the beater against the head, like throwing a tennis ball against a brick wall or something. So training myself to let the beater bounce off of the head, I think helped my kick sound a lot better, because the sound was projecting more instead of getting choked off by pressing the beater into the head. You know, when we're playing on the drums, you don't dig the sticks into the drums. Right? That sounds terrible unless you're doing that for a particular effect. So why would we do that on the bass drum? And when the beater is bouncing off of the head, you're working with the pedal, because the beater naturally wants to stay away from the head. And nowadays, I could practice for a few hours and my knee and my hip, they don't get sore. How about that? Now, getting more specifically into the triple stroke mechanic here, we can think of our leg as actually being pretty similar to our arm, in the sense that we have a bunch of different pivot points that we can utilize. You got your shoulder, you got your elbow, you got your wrist, and we have the pivot point created at our fulcrum, where we actually hold the stick. Our leg pretty much has all the same parts. We have our hip, which is basically the same thing as your shoulder, your knee, which is kind of like your elbow, your ankle, which is like your wrist, and then your foot fulcrum, or where your foot contacts the pedal. In my case, since I generally play heel up, that would be the ball of my foot. And we got to utilize all these pivot points to create that whipping motion that we use with our hands all the time when we're playing the drums. So for the sliding technique in general, it typically works out so the last stroke is accented. And the same thing is going to happen with these triple strokes. I basically think of it as 2 upstrokes leading into a downstroke. If I were to do something like that with my hand, it looks like this. I'm essentially able to execute 3 strokes, accenting the 3rd stroke, all with one motion. We could apply the same mechanic to the bass drum pedal. Remember, your foot is going to begin and end in the same position, so if my foot starts between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way up the pedal, depending on the size of the footboard, the first stroke comes from dropping my foot back a little bit. The second stroke is driven primarily by the ankle, it's just a little tap, and then the 3rd stroke comes from sliding my foot back to the starting position, and doing so will accent that last stroke. On its own, it looks something like this. To begin applying this mechanic, we'll use permutations of 3/16 notes. So I'll play a basic rock pattern with my hands, just steady 1/8 notes on the hi-hats, 2 and 4 on the snare drum, and then I'll go through all of the possible 3/16 note combinations in a single beat, starting with 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and, followed by 1 E, a 2 E, a 3 E, a 4 E, followed by 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and then finally E and up, E and up, E and up, E and up. And I'll do all of that in a sequence, playing each rhythm for 2 measures before moving to the next. To get two birds stoned at once, we could cycle through all of these 16th note permutations by thinking of our bass drum rhythm as a 5-beat pattern, where we play the first 3 parts of each 5-beat grouping, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if we overlay that rhythm into 16th notes, we get something that resolves after 5 beats. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and a 1. And to ensure that you're really utilizing this mechanic, focus on always accenting the 3rd stroke of each grouping. We could also apply this mechanic in a 16th triplet setting, and I usually will do this as 16th triplets ending on a downbeat, like boom, zip, got, zip, boom, got, zip, boom, got, zip, boom, got, zip, boom. Why am I beatboxing it? I'll just play it. As you get more comfortable with this technique, you'll be able to compress all the movements, which will allow you to play them even faster and with a higher level of precision, and you'll start to be able to even out the dynamics a little bit more, so that 3rd stroke won't feel quite as punctuated. You just want to make sure that you're working with your gear instead of against it. Don't be the person that's always forcing an outcome, because you're going to develop bad habits, and you might hurt yourself in the process, which would be 2 thumbs down. If you like what you saw in this video, check out my Patreon page. Your support grants you access to transcriptions for this video, as well as transcriptions for all my other lesson videos. And follow me on Instagram @DrumMerhar to see more videos of my playing. As always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.